the mind, although it's calculating and it's perceiving and processing, is not consciousness. Consciousness is separate. It is the ground
where the field of where it arises.
Yes, the field in which the mind arises, and where then the human brain is doing its calculations and its perceptions and its experiencing.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Soul Sessions, another episode. I am Deborah Burnt-Maldonado. I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado with Creative Mind. And this series that we're starting this week is about the great minds of philosophy.
That's right. We finished up the series on the great minds of psychology. So now we're going a little bit deeper.
Yes, this is going to be a juicy series. So if you are watching us on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe here. Click the button in the corner. And if you're listening to us on podcasts, services such as Spotify, iTunes, and all those great services, don't forget to subscribe. We are going to be covering a lot in the next few weeks. The different philosophers that have impacted our life and probably have impacted yours. And maybe you didn't even know they did. So we're going to start off this series with one of my favorite philosophers. I have many, but Adi Shankara, really very influential for me. Actually, the book, Like a Spark from Fire, my book was, I read something he taught around the spark and fire about his teachings, and that's where I got the inspiration for the title. So I'm ready to dive in. So let's talk about
why
Adi.
Philosophy.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with let's say our approach to philosophy and our approach to this series, because we want to place it in the right context so that people understand our motivation for it. We are students of the mind, and so our interest is any philosophy, any psychology, any science, any information on what is the nature of the mind, how does it work, and what makes it work is important to us. And so we're not approaching these philosophers, some of them which are associated with religious or spiritual practices, necessarily from that perspective, right? We honor and respect people that approach them that way, of course. They're doing important work. But for us, it's more that we're interested in their teaching on consciousness, on the mind, on perception, on what is the nature of mind and reality. So Adi Shankara, he's got to be one of the heavy hitters of all time on the nature of consciousness and the mind. And he was around, they're not sure of the time because they didn't have,
a lot of record keeping back then, but 800 AD around that time. Buddhism had been flourishing in India for hundreds of years. And he was a young philosopher, and he wanted to reform the Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta religion, the Hinduism, because it was kind of falling to the side and people were forgetting about it and going to Buddhism. And you know how it is. People want to keep up, keep the popularity of their work. And so he really transformed the teachings into something more approachable for people and applicable to the everyday person, not just the monks. So his work is really practical. His readings are really practical. That's what I love about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, so he died very young. He only lived, I think, to be around 30 years of age. He kind of burned the candle at both ends. By the time he was 8, he was already translating text and writing commentaries on some of the spiritual texts of the times. Of course, he grew up on Vedic texts, the Upanishads. He wrote a commentary on the Brahma Sutras, which made him famous in India. And then he traveled throughout India on foot, or just kind of as a pilgrim, and founded 4 big centers in different parts of India.
One of the books I read that it's a translation of his work. It's called In the Light of the Self, Adi Shankara and the Yoga of Non-Dualism. And what I loved about this book is that I've studied different spirituality lineages and, just trying to understand these questions that come up about reincarnation and what does it karma mean and all these, Eastern ideas. And so he has interviews, people come into his temple, and the book is answering all the questions that you would have. So that's why I really loved this book particularly, because it was like, oh yeah, I've always wondered about that, and I always wondered about this. And the way he put it in, people would come in and challenge him all the time. And I loved it, because that's really how you really learn, is by challenging these ideas. And so I think it's an incredible text. If you get a chance to get it, it's on Amazon. And we can post the link to it in the comments below.
Yeah, there's also some great videos on more of the kind of the spiritual perspective of his work, which we'll also post at the bottom of the video, from some of our friends in the Ramakrishna centers in New York and Boston, the Advaita Vedanta schools. So Advaita Vedanta and Adi Shankara is considered the foundational philosopher or spiritual leader of Advaita Vedanta, which is non-dualistic Vedanta.
So Advaita means not two.
Not two.
Yeah.
Non-dual.
And so what does non-dual mean for people that maybe never heard that term before?
Yeah. So in the West, we're used to talking about oneness, right? But it's kind of pointing at the same principle. But the not two is referring to spirit and matter, or consciousness and matter. That these are not two phenomena, but one. And of course, he is known for not the originator of this idea, because his teacher's teacher, this guy named Guru or Swami Gaudapada, is considered kind of the originator that really brought out this idea from the Upanishads and the Vedas that the universe is non-dual, that there are not two elements but only one, and that oneness, of course, is consciousness.
And we know now through the recent science, they're looking at consciousness, and they're starting to discover this weirdness about how everything is connected. Absolutely. And that we're all one. And there's something that ties us all together. We're all like the same, made up the original stuff. That's the same stuff.
Yeah, if you look at quantum mechanics and the way they speak, they seem to be speaking the same language as Gaudapada and Adi Shankara, that everything is dependent on the observer, that the observer is essentially collapsing the wave into particles, or in other words, creating reality through perception. But of course, the perceiver is also a quantum experience, and that is also in alignment with their philosophy, or Adi Shankara's philosophy and teachings, that our consciousness is the divine essence of the universe. So let's back up a little bit to kind of put ourselves back in India, in ancient India.
Eat, pray, love, maybe? Really, pray, love.
No, this is way before that. Let's say the 8th century. So like you were saying, Buddhism had been flourishing around that time, and then was starting to decline. And Adi Shankara was more from the original Hindu schools, the Brahmanistic kind of approach to the Vedas and the Upanishads. And his philosophy started to really take shape in relationship to the debates he was having with Buddhist scholars and monks.
Very interesting, those debates.
Yeah. So we see the usefulness of debate, and also one of the characteristics and why we love philosophy is because we are open to questioning it. In other words, it's not about believing. It's not about...
it's written in the book, so it must be true. It's about, this is this philosophy, try to pull it apart. And that's really what science is about too. The science has theories, and then it's always kind of looking to disprove the theory to reinforce it or disprove it. And that's how we should approach everything in life. We should have a critical mind versus just accepting what people say. And, I guess that's the way it is. And so to think for ourselves is really important.
Yes. So in kind of learning from the Upanishads, which already kind of contain the seeds of the understanding of consciousness and the mind and what reality is, Adi Shankara, of course, through his teachers as well, the people that taught him the practices of discernment, and they were very much into what now became Jnana Yoga, which is the understanding that knowledge, this higher knowledge, is the one that enlightens the mind, versus some of the other schools that take different approaches. So Jnana Yoga, or this jnana, this knowledge, what it does, it purifies the mind so that it can perceive its true nature.
So when you, for example, if you read a book and you read a higher knowledge book, not like a fiction book, that you're reading, it's purifying your mind just by like stimulating that mind with the information. And it's almost like you're not learning it, it's you're remembering it. It's like, I know for me, when I read, the Gita or these books like Adi Shankara, it feels like, I'm remembering something, or like this feels right, versus, wait a minute, like I'm learning something new and I have to really think about it. It's more like I see this, and through that self-inquiry, that kind of questioning and maybe wrestling with it, you're purifying your mind. Because if you just accept it, it's just like putting like ice cream on top of a pie, it's like, it makes it a little nicer. But what you're doing is really dissecting and sifting out what you really believe and what is the truth. And I think with all of us, we do have this sense of what truth is, but it's been covered up by our life experience. And so by reading or studying these deep spiritual ideas, we can actually, purify the noise and basically uncondition ourselves from the false way we see the world.
That's right. So this is from one of the Upanishads, the Mundaka Upanishad. It says, "He who knows this Brahman, hidden in the cave of the heart, cuts asunder even here the knot of ignorance." So it kind of gets at what you were saying, right? That it's already hidden in your heart. This higher knowledge, this understanding is already in you, because, again, you as the observer of the universe, of the world, are not separate from it, non-dual from it, meaning you are one with it. So
it is you.
Yes, in examining the world and trying to understand the universe, you have to begin with understanding yourself. In other words, going into your heart, to this cave that is in the heart, where Brahman, and Brahman here, we can say that their understanding was its existence, consciousness, and bliss. Those three elements describe what Brahman is. It is your own existence, right? Your own beingness, meaning that you cannot deny this. If somebody asks you, are you aware? Are you existing right now? You cannot respond with no, because
you're here.
Yes, because
unless you're in deep sleep and I talk to you and you don't answer. That's probably the only time. But you're still existing, because you wake up and you realize there was a time where you weren't aware. So you were aware that you weren't aware, which means that you existed.
That's right.
That's the kind of twistiness that this higher knowledge makes you, because it sounds contradictory, and then it's harder to really absorb. But once you get it, it's like it clicks in you, like it's like you remember.
Yes, and the ignorance that it's freeing us from. In other words, realizing that the core of you, the essence of you, the awareness in you, is this higher consciousness that pervades and creates the universe. It's liberating you from ignorance. Now, ignorance here, in the way Adi Shankara defines it, is not just ignorance of facts about the world. It's the ignorance that you have over-identified with your body.
And your personality and this human existence.
And even your mind, which is something, for us students of the mind, of course, this is mind-blowing.
Don't take your mind so seriously.
Because we're using the mind in order to decipher and to undo this knot. But at the same time, the higher teachings are saying, you even have to let go of this, the instrument that is giving you a way to enlightenment. You cannot go there with it. In other words, the mind will not take you there.
And the mind is pretty much run by the ego, although there are two parts to our conscious mind. We have the ego mind, that's kind of that conditioned mind that is watching us, making sure we're fitting in with society, that little chatter in our head and creating stories and drama about our life. And then there's another part, which is the witness. And that witness mind is there too, but it's untouched by that storyteller, the narrator, and the fearful part of ourselves. And the only reason we aren't aware of it is because the ego mind is so loud. And so this is still the mind, but it's just a different level of mind that's closer to our true nature. Yeah. And so to know that it's already there because we're aware of ourselves, that it's right there, and we forget it because it's quiet. It's beingness. And we pay attention to the noise.
That's right. So Adi Shankara defines this Brahman as this universal consciousness that creates everything, including us, including everything. There's nothing outside of it, essentially, he says. So then the question is, well, how do this individuality that I experience, how does that come about? Mm-hmm. And he says, at the core of your individuality is the Atman. So the Atman is identical to Brahman. In other words, it's identical to the universal consciousness, but it's your personalized consciousness.
And that's where I got this phrase, like a spark from fire, because he said, if you think of fire and then the sparks that come from the fire are not separate from the fire. They're made of the same exact substance, but it appears separate. So it feels like it's separate. But he said, just like you are like a spark from fire. You are one with fire. You are the same, even though it feels though we're separate because we're in this body and we think, who am I to be God? Who am I to be this universal power? And we go through a stage in our life of forgetting who we truly are. And we get caught up in the world. And this philosophy is about bringing us back home to our true nature. And it's a beautiful, beautiful process. But I think the most important thing, though, is the non-duality, because when I first started exploring my personal development journey and raised Catholic and all the rules and sinning and going to heaven or going to hell, there's a lot of duality. And then even as a hypnotherapist, it was like, make the negative thoughts positive, get your core negative beliefs, make them positive beliefs. And if you think positive and you feel good, then you're going to get good things. And it was still splitting because I was feeling like attached to being positive and then pushing away negative. And I feel like it's rearranging the furniture. You're not really getting anywhere. You're just kind of moving the ego around to be more bubbly and happy, but you're not really getting that true transformation that I think is possible for us. And when I started learning more about non-duality, my first coach was teaching me non-duality, and then I met you, and it was like we clicked together because we had that same idea. Yeah. Everything started to change, and I started to see it's challenging because we're so conditioned to think in black and white, good and bad, right and wrong, that that it takes an extra step for us to stretch, to remember what the truth is. Yes. And even now, like, we get caught up in the duality of life, us and them, all the good and bad.
Yeah. Yes, because the duality is the appearance of the world. In Vedanta, they often use this idea of a rope that appears to be a snake. Mm-hmm. So that there appear to be two things, right? The appearance of the snake, meaning the world appears to us in a particular way, like a snake, but in essence, it's something different. It's a rope. In other words, what we're perceiving through our senses is an illusion. It's a function of our fear, of our individuality, our desire to protect ourselves and to survive. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that, except that you're not perceiving reality. You're perceiving a false duality.
And even a glimpse. I mean, even in perceptual science, they talk about that we're only focused on like a thumbnail of our world at one time and everything else is blurred. I mean, that's just so crazy. And when you start to go down this rabbit hole of perception and what our brain is showing us. And so that's why we have to question this type of philosophy helps us question what we're seeing, what are the assumptions we're making about the world. I know for me, I mean, a very simple thing is that idea that when something bad happens or you want something to happen and it doesn't happen and you judge it, you like, that's bad. But you don't know there's something in there that actually, when you look back at your life and you say that thing that you thought was bad actually was a catalyst for something else. And so when you start seeing there's no good or bad, and that is, I think, liberating, because then we're not so caught up in hanging on to only having the good things in life, that whatever shows up, we're opening it, we're welcoming it, and seeing it in that non-dualistic way as just an opportunity, just as a way to know ourselves and what's showing up and what is our mind doing.
Yeah. So from, let's say, our biology, right, the way our senses are designed, we perceive the world to be separate from us, to be independent of our mind. Let's say the perception or the illusion that it creates is that if I close my eyes, or even if I don't exist, right, if I die and pass away, that the world, yeah, I know, that the world will still remain the same way that I perceive it. Just simply that I won't be there to perceive it.
What if you walk out of a room? Is the room still there?
Yes.
If there's not a mind to perceive it.
Yeah,
it's like that. Does the tree make a sound if it falls in the forest? Does anyone hear it if no one's there to hear it?
Right. Those are the kind of questions that quantum mechanics now is kind of bringing up again, and to try to understand what is the nature of the universe, what is it made out of. So in the Upanishads, in Adi Shankara's work, they define this as Maya, that it's an appearance, it's an illusion, just like the snake appears out of the rope. It appears very real to us, and we react to it, we respond to it, but it is essentially an illusion. Just
like anything in life that we're afraid of, we have an experience of fear, but the fear, it didn't come from that event. It came from our mind interpreting that event. And so the fear happened in our mind. And when we feel pain or we have a painful experience, it didn't happen in the experience, as our mind created the pain. So we realize that our mind is creating it, not the thing itself. Then we could start looking inward versus trying to rearrange the furniture out in the world so we don't feel pain anymore, like putting barriers around ourselves and not getting too close to people, and living out in the country and staying away from the busyness, or avoiding things. We could start to see that we're all we have to do is look at our mind to reduce the suffering versus the world to reduce the suffering. And the world will always reflect, like you said, the mind and the world are the same. So the world's going to reflect what's in your mind. And that is really hard, because people bring up those. So there's a war right now in Ukraine and Russia. Is that in my mind? How does that work? And so there's big, deep questions we have to ask ourselves. Well, what is the implications of the mind?
So let's try to define the non-dualism first, and then we can kind of question the implications of it, right? What does it imply? So in Western psychology, for example, it goes back to Descartes, this idea that the mind must be separate from matter, right? That there must be two essence or two materials that we're dealing with. One is invisible to us. We cannot see the mind, but we know it exists because we're experiencing it. And the other one we can observe and touch and weigh and measure, which is matter. Therefore, they came up with this conclusion that there must be two substances that we're dealing with, mind and matter, or spirit and matter, and that they are two distinct, separate entities or ways of existence. Non-dualism says that is not reality. It appears that way.
It appears separate.
It appears to be separate, and it appears to be two things, spirit and matter, but they are in essence identical. Both are pure awareness. Both are consciousness.
Matter couldn't exist without spirit, and spirit couldn't see itself without matter. or have an experience of itself.
Not only that, but that they are identical. In other words, when you're looking at the world, when you're looking at the universe, matter, you're seeing Brahman, essentially. You're seeing pure awareness. It's simply taking the form of matter. It's appearing as matter.
Just like an ocean creates a wave, the wave is still part of the ocean, but because it's lifting up and has a different shape, we call it a wave. But when it goes back down, it's part of the ocean, and it goes back up, and it's sort of like our life. We kind of rise up like a wave. We have this individual experience, and then we go back into the ocean. But we're not the ocean. We just appeared as though we were separate.
That's it. So one of the metaphors that Adi Shankara uses is the idea of a dream. When you have a dream, you're experiencing a whole world. You're experiencing buildings, people, and animals, perhaps.
Bears chasing you.
Yourself, experiencing a world. When you wake up, you realize it was simply your mind.
It was just a dream.
Creating this world.
Yeah,
this
that was just all in your mind.
So he says this waking reality is very similar to that. It is your mind creating a subjective experience of the world and appearing to you as the universe. But in essence, it is consciousness taking this form of the universe.
And we have our own individual perceptions, and even if you look at your family and your siblings, everyone had a different childhood, everyone had different parents, but we all came from the same place, and so that's what happens in Maya. But I love the idea that we're born with this non-dual spirit, the Atman, and it's like this intelligence, this wisdom, and then we have this body, and we get lost in the world, and it's about coming back and remembering.
Yeah, so the way that it happens, he says, is that the individual Atman, the consciousness within you, the pure awareness in you, is covered over by the sensory experience of the world. So that your senses, your visual senses, are giving you information that makes it appear as if there is a universe out there. But in essence, what you are experiencing is your own consciousness.
Which is mind-blowing.
Yes, it is mind-blowing.
And it doesn't mean that the world isn't real, like that this is all an illusion in a way. It's more that I love the two distinctions of the apparent reality and then the absolute reality. And the apparent reality is this appearance of things in our world, and it's still a type of reality, but it's not the absolute reality. And I love those two distinctions. So we're not thinking, oh, I could just go and like jump off a bridge, or it's not real. It's just just a fantasy that we're in. It is a reality, but it's not the true reality. It's not the absolute reality. And I think we live in the world as if this world is the absolute reality. Like, I got to cling on to life, and I got to get the most out of this life, and before, leave a legacy behind of my persona, so we can, make an impact on the world, all these like great vision. And then that's all there is this kind of, the world has all the power. I think this brings us back to, not that the world doesn't feel as exciting, but you can still be in the world, but you're seeing it for its nature versus seeing it, getting lost in it, and then because that it's stressful and miserable to forget who you really are. Yeah. And so you can have both. It's like not abandoning the material and the Maya, you're having both, non-dual.
Yes, because if you ask, well, why do we suffer? This gets to the nature of human suffering. You mistake the unreal, the appearance of the world, for the real. You think matter must be reality. And if you ask most people on the planet right now, what do you think is real? What can you show me that and for certain that is real? They'll usually point to material things. That for them is the reality. But
show me, I need to see it.
Yes, they want to touch it, they want to see it, they want to weigh it and measure it. Now, that makes intuitive sense from the perceptual illusion that the world creates for us, because it appears to us to be solid and consistent. But if you study it a little bit more, you realize that the appearance of the world is always in flux. It's always changing. even the things that appear very solid, like rocks and iron and steel, the molecules we know now are consistently or constantly vibrating and changing and transforming into something else.
Well, we're always, even our bodies, they change over every 7 years, every cell of our body. So who are we? If we identify as this body is mine, the body you had 7 years ago doesn't exist anymore.
That's right.
And so you're carrying on that conditioning of the mind and that self-concept that you're bringing into the future every day.
Right. So we're betting on the wrong horse, essentially, because we're saying if material is reality, therefore the best I can do is invest my time and energy in obtaining and counting on material things to give me happiness.
And make sure I have enough in the bank account, I have a good credit score, I'm out of debt, and I have the house, and I have the fancy car, or even just for a lot of people, it's about survival, just that my bills are paid this month. And then there's some kind of peace in that. And it's all external, seeking the external world, this constantly moving world for some kind of security that we
That's right.
that we need, and there's no security in the world. That's the scary part. And at first, I think when you read this work, those of you who are new to this non-duality concept, it's kind of scary in a way. It's like everything you know about that makes you secure. Like the ego loves having to label things as good or bad, and this is the way things are, and here's a moral code I can follow. And when you start examining this, you get a little wonky in your mind because you're like, okay, like what I thought was real is not real, and then you're trying to get a sense of where do I find that absolute again that you absolutely thought was real and was not.
Yes, and there is an absolute, of course, and that's the beauty of Shankara's work, is that he's saying, in correcting that misperception of mistaking the unreal for the real, you will gain true knowledge, liberation from suffering, even from death. This is kind of what, kind of the deeper implications of his message, that it's not only about like an intellectual understanding of what the world is and what your mind is, but that realizing the true nature of your being liberates you from the bondage of limitations.
Well, this is a great segue to this little blurb I'm going to read from this book, In the Light of the Self. It was Alistair Shearer was the translator, or the author that translated. So it's a little story, and it sounds familiar because it's a very common archetypal story. There was once a prince who was discarded by his parents at birth and brought up in a family of a fowler. Unaware of his true descent, he grew up imagining himself to be a fowler and pursued this occupation when he grew up. I don't know what a fowler is. I think it would be like a shepherd or something. But it chanced that a very compassionate man who knew the real situation came by the fowler's house one day and told the young prince the true state of affairs. Appraised of the reality, the young fowler immediately abandoned his hut and moved into the palace to take up his real duties as a monarch. Like that, when a man living in ignorance and suffering is told by a teacher that he is in reality nothing but the absolute, but has been living in exile, so to speak, like a spark separated from a fire, then he realizes his true status and abandons identification with the limited self and all of its miseries. So we've all heard that story. I mean, The Lion King. I mean, there's so many stories of the prince who forgot, didn't know he was a prince and went out. Hercules, a lot of those Greek myths, very similar. But it's true. We forget the magnificence of who we are, and we think we're this little tiny cork bobbing on the ocean, hailing and wailing about the storms and the waves crashing us and helpless, but we're really this incredible power, and we're connected to everything. And so this is kind of a grandiose idea. So how can we bring it down, and what implications does it have on us in our everyday life, the non-dual philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the human world, we move in this world of relationships to other people and work, We're always, having to do something to sustain our life. In health and wellness, we're always concerned about our mind and body to make sure that it's healthy and operating well. And then, of course, we have these philosophical and spiritual questions of what is the meaning of my life. So those four areas, if you think, what is this non-dualistic understanding of the world and my mind? What can it teach me? How can it liberate me from that human suffering that we experience? So one of the Upanishads says, what delusion, what sorrow can there be for him who beholds the oneness of the jiva and the Brahman? And the jiva simply means the individual self again, or the sense of our individuality. And the Brahman is that universal non-dual consciousness. In other words, it's showing us that everything we are experiencing is us. It is our consciousness, our awareness. It is arising within our awareness, very similar to the way a dream is experienced during the night. When we're asleep, we're creating a whole universe, a whole drama of our life. But once we wake up, we are freed from it. We can still experience it and enjoy it and marvel at it, but we understand its nature. So it's the same principle in this life, that whatever we're experiencing, we can still experience it. We can be almost like in a lucid dream, that we are aware and appreciating it, but we're understanding its true nature, that I'm not necessarily limited by the appearance of it. I'm not really hurt by the things that appear to hurt me. I'm not bound to the things that appear to bind me and limit me.
Well, if you think about just the idea of psychological projection, we are projecting our mind onto everything. So when we think about people that trigger us, whether you're doing like individuation or people, or just like you're seeing a situation through your own filter, it's just to remember that you're seeing a situation through your own filter. Someone else sees that same situation from another filter. So who is right? There's no right or wrong. And two people can have the same exact experience and have two different inner experiences of it. And so it really comes down to, it's all in our mind. And the truth is not you're right or they're right, but there's an absolute reality, which is neither of you are seeing reality. You're seeing a tiny piece, a glimpse of what is true, but you're not seeing the whole picture. And that's what really studying this type of philosophy, purify your mind from the delusions that keep you unhappy. Things that used to trigger me or get me upset or I would worry about, I don't worry about them as much because I immediately go back to, this is like, there's even someone who could be really annoying or someone hurtful. You can just go and know that there's a part of me in them somewhere, like I'm seeing myself in them, that there's something deep within them that's pure and untouched by life that has always been there. And to be able to see people beyond what they're presenting or what your mind is thinking they're presenting and really talking to them soul to soul, I think that would make a huge impact on relationships, on the way we treat people in the world, the possibilities people feel to live their life, like not be afraid of other people or what other people think. And, there's so much freedom in that. And then, of course, like from a global scale, the wars, the countries like projecting on each other, who's right and who's wrong. There'd be world leaders, if they can understand these deeper philosophies, things would dramatically change in our life. It doesn't mean that it would be perfect, but I think there'd be less suffering.
Oh, absolutely, because it put things in the right perspective. So this is from the Gita. It says, as a kindled fire reduces wood to ashes, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all reactions from material activities. So reactions from material activities, what it's talking about is conditioning. This is that purification that happens through gaining true knowledge. In other words, gaining a true understanding of the nature of consciousness, understanding that the appearance of the world, the way it appears to you, is your making. Now people read it as, well, I didn't wish to experience these things. How can you say that I'm making it?
I created it,
right?
yeah.
Well, we're not talking about the ego. In other words, when you experience yourself as an individual, you're experiencing your ego, not the true awareness in you, not the pure awareness in you, not the Brahman in you. Therefore, that is not what we mean, and that is not what Adi Shankara meant. He means the true self in you is allowing all these experiences to arise. Your lack of understanding is the one that is causing your individual ego to suffer, because it's essentially misreading the whole situation.
Well, if you think about it, there are terrible things that can happen to you. I know this is what's going on in people's minds. So let's say this terrible thing happened to you. Your ego makes it feel that you're permanently damaged because of that terrible thing, and that you're always going to suffer because of that terrible thing. That's the mind creating that. And a lot of us don't know how to let go of our suffering from a past experience, because there's something our ego wants to hang on to so it doesn't happen again. And so it's almost like we're hurting ourselves versus seeing the experience for its nature. Understanding in this world has a lot of, not nice people and sometimes, and acting out of their own conditioning. But to understand that we don't have to carry this our whole life, that we're not like permanently scarred by things. It feels that way. And if we think we're permanently scarred, that's what we'll create. So we're creating that versus there is a way out. And I know a lot of times, many of people I work with over the years, they define themselves by something that happened to them, and that identity takes over and they can't be anything else. And it's almost like they feel like someone took something away from them, a possibility away now because of that event. A parent wasn't there for them, or someone who had passed, or some terrible thing that happened. And we get to decide what we want to make of it. And that's the liberation, is that nothing hits our true nature, like that, the true self cannot be harmed, cannot be damaged. And so if we know that the things that occurred in the world that are from the ego, this moving constant flux, in the mind of the ego, that there's something beneath us that wasn't touched by it. And that is our true nature. That's the absolute reality. And I think that would liberate a lot of people, and they can move on and not feel limited because maybe they had the wrong parents, or they grew up in the wrong neighborhood, or there's something bad happened to them that they can't overcome. And even illness, we can transcend anything if we have the knowledge of what reality is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is kind of the delicate points a lot of students of the mind come to, is kind of separating the mental experience in our lives from this pure consciousness and pure awareness. Because in the West, we're taught that the mental experience is consciousness. And in Adi Shankara's work, he's not defining the mind in that sense. The mind, although it's calculating and it's perceiving and processing, is not consciousness. Consciousness is separate. It is the ground where
the field of where it arises.
Yes, the field in which the mind arises, and where then the human brain is doing its calculations and its perceptions and its experiencing. And so at the end of the day, that awareness, that consciousness is untainted by the human experience. And that understanding then gives us the right perception that we cannot be damaged by human experience. If we identify with it, of course that we are going to feel traumatized and damaged, like so many people. It's so popular right now, this idea of trauma, that we're traumatized. Yeah, of course, from the perspective of our individual jiva.
The ego.
Our ego incarnation, our individuality. It feels like these experiences have damaged us, have traumatized us. But if you have this deeper understanding of the non-dual nature of existence, you see that the pure awareness in us cannot be damaged.
It's just an invincible feeling that no matter what happened to you, you can create your life. And that's, Carl Jung said that, no matter what happened to you, you're free to create your life. And that's really, this knowledge purifies the mind from the ego thinking to bad and wrong and victimhood and aggressors and us versus them and good and bad and right and wrong to something much deeper and more profound that's within us that can give us the strength to go and say, you do have a passion for helping those who've suffered in the same way you have. That's great. But you want to help them by purifying their mind, by letting them know and inspiring them that they can create that's not a life sentence for them, whatever happens to them. It's just, we don't want to minimize it, of course, but it's not unsurmountable. And I think that's really a freedom that you can give people. If you purify your mind through that experience, you can help others purify theirs.
So last but not least, there's a beautiful quote from the Isa Upanishad. It says, he or the person that obtains immortality through knowledge. And it means this higher knowledge, of course, not the ordinary knowledge of the world, but the understanding of the true nature of yourself. You become immortal because you are now identifying with that true source, which is indestructible, essential,
unbreakable, unstoppable.
Yes, there are terms or concepts in Western psychology, Western philosophy, that kind of talk about the soul in those terms. So that's similar. I think the great difference that we see in Adi Shankara's work and Vedanta in general is this idea that you can have it now, that you are that now, that you don't have to wait to die to experience this oneness and this non-dual state.
Or earn your way to heaven, that heaven can be here right now in this moment.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we're excited to share more of this topic with you on future podcasts. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel here. We'd love to have you here every week if you're here on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify, iTunes, and all the podcast services, make sure you click subscribe and get our next episode where we're going to continue our series on the great minds of philosophy. And so have a great week, everyone. Happy summer, and we'll see you next week.